The hum of the old sedan was the only steady sound on that long stretch of highway. My name is Alethea, and at 35 I've grown used to the rhythm of wheels on asphalt, used to being the one who takes the long road alone. The seats sagged under me, the cracked leather stuck to the back of my thighs, and the air conditioner had given up years ago. I rolled down the window, letting the dry wind sting my face. 900 kilometers behind me, just a few more to go. Most people drive to weddings to celebrate. I was driving to a wedding I paid for, or at least the part no one wanted to cover, the deposit on the venue, a ranch outside Denver. I worked overtime for months, skipped small comforts, sent that transfer with a steady hand and a quiet pride. No one would see my name in the program. My sister's would be printed in bold, hers and her new husband's, along with our parents who hadn't lifted a finger. But not mine. In America, I whispered to myself, they say family sticks together. What they don't tell you is, sometimes family only remembers who shows up with money. I thought about something I'd once read, a quote that had stuck with me. Family is supposed to be your safe place. If it isn't, it becomes the storm. And as the highway signs began pointing toward Denver, I wondered which one mine had become. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, pushing the car a little harder, letting the noise of the engine drown out the ache in my chest. The phone buzzed on the passenger seat, screen lighting up with a name I knew too well, Sopheneba, my sister. I flicked my eyes to it, then back to the road, waiting for the words to pop up. Hope you're not late again. No hello, no thank you. No, how far are you? Just that jab. I exhaled through my nose, a laugh without humor. Not even 1 mile closer to Denver, and already she's got her claws in. I spoke to the empty car, but it helped me sort through the sting. Funny, I drove 900 kilometers, and all she cares about is whether I'll embarrass her in front of her friends. Sopheneba had always been the golden one, the daughter praised for her poise, the one family pointed to with pride. I'd been the quiet shadow, the reliable one who showed up, who worked, who paid when others wouldn't. She wore the crown, and I carried the weight. I glanced back at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard. For a second, I thought about answering, reminding her who had kept the lights on for this party, but then I set the phone back down. Why waste my breath? Some people, I muttered, mistake kindness for weakness. The road stretched on, but my frustration quickened the pace of my thoughts. The hum of the tires lulled me into memory. I could still see myself standing behind the counter at the diner where I picked up extra shifts, apron stained, hands aching. I'd stayed late, again and again, letting my feet throb under the weight of double shifts. I remembered clipping coupons for groceries, putting back small luxuries, no new shoes that month, no dinners out, just bare necessities, all to save enough for that single transfer. The night I sent the deposit, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the screen before I hit confirm. A moment of quiet triumph. Pride doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it's just the glow of a computer screen in a dim kitchen, reminding you that you pulled off the impossible. But even as I thought about it now, the bitterness rose. That deposit built the stage, but I wouldn't be mentioned once when people clapped. It reminded me of another phrase I'd heard. Money may not buy happiness, but it sure builds the stage for someone else's show. Still, under all that, a thread of hope tugged. Maybe, just maybe, someone would look my way this time and say, "We know what you did." Foolish, maybe, but hope has a way of slipping through even the smallest cracks. By the time I reached Denver, the sky had shifted into a pale morning glow, mountains rising like watchful giants behind the city. The air was cooler here, carrying a sharpness that my old sedan couldn't capture inside its suffocating cabin. The skyline shimmered in the distance, glass towers reflecting sunlight, but I didn't head there. I pulled instead into the lot of a budget motel, its peeling paint and flickering neon sign greeting me like an old acquaintance. I cut the engine, silence settling around me for the first time in hours. Dragging my small bag from the back seat, I checked in with the night clerk who barely glanced at me. I washed my face, changed my shirt, and caught my reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. Tired eyes, but steady. "They'll never know I stayed at a motel," I told the woman in the glass, while paying for a venue where champagne flows like water. I smiled, but it wasn't bitterness this time. It was dignity. Quiet, but sharp. After a short rest, I packed up again and guided the sedan back to the highway, following the signs toward the ranch. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled near the venue. Wooden fences lined the drive, fields of green rolling out under the wide Colorado sky. The place was stunning, every corner of it polished for the celebration, and I had put down the foundation that made it possible. I parked near the back lot, engine ticking as it cooled. Before I could unbuckle, the phone buzzed again. Another message from Sopheneba. Park in the back. No greeting. No welcome. Just an order. I sat there a moment, staring at the screen. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel, the leather warm under my palms. If this is how it starts, I whispered, what else have they planned for me? I inhaled deeply, letting the air fill me, bracing for what was to come. I drove slowly up the gravel path, the sound crunching beneath my tires, each stone a reminder of how far I had come. The motel's dim light and peeling paint were behind me, and now I was pulling into a scene that belonged in a glossy magazine. To my left, polished black SUVs, pearl-white Teslas, and rental luxury sedans lined the lot like a showroom. My own faded sedan, with its cracked mirror and squeaky door, looked like it had stumbled into the wrong story. I rolled down the window as I approached the venue. The ranch was sprawling, its main hall built with rustic wood beams wrapped in strings of fairy lights that still twinkled even in daylight. Rolling hills stretched into the horizon, horses grazing calmly in the distance, as if nothing could disturb the serenity of the scene. It was stunning. It was everything people would talk about when they described the perfect wedding. And I knew, deep inside, that the perfection they praised had been made possible because of me. As I parked, I smoothed my dress, modest and simple. Not a gown, not a designer label, just something I had chosen because it was clean, comfortable, and respectful. I watched as guests stepped out of their cars, dressed in silk and pressed suits, their laughter floating on the breeze. I carried pride that I had built the foundation for this day, and unease, knowing already how invisible I would be. I whispered under my breath, money built these walls, but respect was never part of the contract. I had barely shut the car door when Sopheneba appeared at the entrance of the hall. Her gown glistened even under the late afternoon sun, fitted perfectly, her hair styled like a bride out of a catalog. Her smile was tight, her voice sharper than her painted lips. Glad you made it. Finally. The words were casual enough to anyone else, but I knew the blade hidden beneath them. There was no hug, no thank you, not even acknowledgement of the hours I had driven or the money I had given. Just that reminder, sharp and public, that she expected me to be late, to fail, to disappoint. Guests walking in turned slightly, catching the tension but pretending to look away. That was the way our family had always worked. Notice the wound, but never bandage it. I forced a small smile, met her eyes, and replied, you know, you can tell a lot about family by what they say when strangers are listening. Her lips tightened further, but she turned before anyone could catch the flash of irritation. She swept into the hall, basking in the greetings of aunts and cousins who rushed forward to kiss her cheek. I lingered outside for a moment, inhaling deeply, remembering a saying I'd once heard from an older neighbor. Hospitality starts at the door. If it's cold there, it won't get warmer inside. I knew then the chill wouldn't leave me all night. Inside, ushers moved briskly, guiding guests to their tables. I followed, hoping for at least a place that didn't scream of dismissal. But as I approached my table, the truth stung. My name tag rested far at the back, close to the catering station. The hum of trays being stacked, waiters shuffling in and out of swinging doors. This was where they placed me. Not near family, not near the bride's table, but tucked beside distant cousins and near enough to the service staff that I could hear their whispered jokes. The tablecloth was the same white linen as the others, but the position said it all. Empty seats sat unclaimed at the front, right by Sopheneba and her new in-laws. No one offered me to move closer. No one even pretended. I slid into my chair, stiff, my eyes sweeping over the room. Crystal glasses clinked, silver cutlery gleamed, laughter filled the air, but my spot felt like exile. I thought to myself, in families like this, the seating chart says more than the vows. Humiliation sat heavy, mixed with bitterness. From my chair, I had the perfect view of everyone else's joy. Guests lifted champagne flutes, their voices rising in cheerful greetings. Relatives drifted toward Sopheneba, showering her with compliments. You look radiant. You really outdid yourself. This is the wedding of the year. Their voices carried, but none of them crossed my table. Myrtle, our older cousin, walked past me. Her eyes brushed mine for a fleeting second, but she didn't stop. She turned sharply, leaning toward another guest, whispering something that ended in a laugh. I poured myself water, the jug heavy in my hand, and took a sip. The cool liquid was refreshing, but it felt like a mask, something to keep me busy, something to stop me from speaking. Silence, I reminded myself, can be armor, but sometimes it feels like chains. The clatter of plates announced dinner's arrival. As waiters circulated, I caught the faintest murmur near the kitchen doors. One leaned to another, voice low, but clear enough to catch. Keep this table stocked last. Priority goes to the main hall. The words tightened something inside me. I looked down at my plate, fingers gripping the fork harder than I realized. I thought, if this is only the seating, how far will they go to erase me tonight? And with that, I knew. This was just the beginning. The wooden doors of the reception hall opened wide, spilling light and laughter into the evening air. I stepped inside, the glow of fairy lights strung across heavy beams, washing over me. The air was rich with the scent of roasted meats, fresh flowers, and champagne. Guests in fine dresses and suits mingled easily, voices rising with cheer. Servers glided between tables balancing trays of sparkling glasses, the clink of crystal filling the room. I scanned the crowd with cautious hope. Maybe, for once, they would see me as more than the background character. Maybe this night would bend the old script. My eyes caught the sign at the end of the hall, pointing toward my table number. I adjusted the hem of my dress, lifted my chin, and walked forward. Sometimes, I whispered to myself, you tell yourself that this time will be different. But families rarely rewrite the script. The music softened as I passed rows of decorated tables, each centerpiece blooming with white roses and flickering candles. The beauty of it all pressed down on me like irony. I had built this stage, but my role in the play was still undefined. I reached my seat and froze. On the ivory cardstock, my name was written in elegant calligraphy, Alethea. But below it, in a jagged scrawl of dark ink, one word had been added, FREeloader. My breath caught. The laughter and conversation around me dimmed into a blur, like a muffled radio. The card was thick in my hand, heavier than paper should be. My chest tightened as I stared at that word, carved as surely as if it had been etched into stone. At the next table, a couple leaned toward one another. The man smirked and muttered, "Guess they had to include her somehow." His partner chuckled softly, their eyes flicking toward me, then away. I swallowed hard, forcing my shoulders to stay upright, though my pulse drummed in my ears. 19 years of holding myself together, 19 years of stepping up when no one else did, and this was the label they handed me. I thought of a saying I'd once read, "You can survive anything if you can stand the humiliation." But why should you? The words stared back at me, daring me to break. I lowered myself into the chair, stiff and mechanical, my hands resting like stone on the tablecloth. No one reached for the card to correct it. No usher swept in to apologize. It sat there, a silent insult endorsed by the absence of protest. Sopheneba swept past in her gown, her train brushing lightly against the floorboards. She glanced at me for half a second, her eyes catching the card in front of me, then she looked away, smile frozen, as if she hadn't seen a thing. The guests around us shifted their eyes quickly. Some looked away with pity, others with mild amusement. Myrtle, my older cousin, leaned toward an uncle and said, loud enough for me to hear, "At least they're honest." A short laugh followed, brittle and sharp. My fingers curled into my lap. Every instinct screamed to rip the card in two, to stand and shout. Instead, I pressed my palms flat against my knees. Sometimes silence is mistaken for weakness, I told myself. But silence can be a blade waiting for the right time. So I sat. I let the card stay where it was. and I waited. The lights dimmed, and the murmur of the crowd quieted. A projector flicked on, its glow spilling across the far wall. The slideshow began, soft piano music rising as photographs appeared. Sopheneba as a baby in our mother's arms. Sopheneba at her 5th birthday, blowing out candles. Sopheneba in a white dress on her first communion. The guests applauded softly with each frame. I watched, waiting for the moment I might see myself beside her, even once. Photo after photo passed. Vacations to Florida, Christmas mornings by the tree, family portraits with matching sweaters, and yet in every frame, my face was missing. I sat frozen, my hand tightening on the fabric of my dress under the table. The laughter of others filled the room, clapping as the slideshow painted a story of family that erased me entirely. It wasn't just one photo missing. It wasn't an oversight. It was an entire life rewritten without me. The applause rose as the final picture appeared. Sopheneba in her engagement dress, smiling with her fiancé, her arms full of flowers. I stayed still, my pulse hammering, the word FREeloader burning in front of me like a brand. As the lights lifted and the piano faded, guests rose to toast, glasses shimmering in the glow. Sopheneba stood in the spotlight, her smile wide, her hand lifted to wave. They cheered her, adored her, celebrated her story as if it was the only one worth telling. I sat back, silent, the sting spreading through my chest. My eyes locked again on the nameplate, the inked words slicing deeper than any spoken insult. I leaned closer to whisper, so only I could hear. If they erased me from the past, what else will they erase tonight? The applause swelled, but all I could feel was the weight of the silence around me, pressing, tightening, daring me not to fight. Dinner began with the clatter of plates and the hiss of waiters balancing trays, the hall filled with warmth, candlelight reflecting against crystal glasses, laughter bouncing around like coins tossed in a fountain. Guests leaned close over their plates, swapping stories, voices high with cheer. The scent of butter and garlic wafted up as appetizers landed before them. At the far end, my table sat like a forgotten island. I heard the scrape of forks against china from the bride's table, polished, spotlighted, brimming with attention, while mine stayed dim. The candles flickered, shadows stretching across my place setting. Around me, the sound dulled, like I'd been cordoned off into silence no one else felt. Meals are supposed to pull families together. Here, they carved the distance into the seating chart itself. I smoothed my napkin over my lap, keeping my face neutral as the waiters moved past, eager to reach the better tables first. It didn't take long. A cousin on his second glass of wine lifted it lazily, pretending to toast in my direction. His words slurred with humor, he thought harmless. Too bad some of us don't really contribute. At least she showed up. The nearby tables erupted with a ripple of laughter, subtle, sharp, carrying exactly far enough for me to hear. A few glanced at me, grinning, then went back to their plates. I forced a polite smile, my hand tightening around the stem of my water glass. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. In America, they say you shouldn't bite the hand that feeds you. My family, they'd rather laugh at it. Across the table, one of the younger cousins whispered, "That was harsh." His mother hushed him quickly, nudging him back toward his food. They didn't want to interfere. I set my glass down gently. "You all enjoy the meal," I said, my tone measured. "I know how much effort goes into making something like this happen." The cousin looked at me with faint recognition, but no one else responded. The laughter carried on. Then came the comparison, the one they always reached for when they needed a weapon. Myrtle, older than most at the table, leaned back in her chair and spoke loudly enough for nearby guests to catch every word. "Sopheneba has always been the responsible one. She makes things happen, not like her younger sister." Her voice dripped with pride as she raised her glass toward the bride's table. Heads turned, and some guests nodded in agreement. A few gasped softly, but none protested. My jaw clenched, teeth pressing together until it hurt. I thought of the deposit, the sleepless nights, the dinners I skipped, so there would be enough. None of that mattered, not in this hall, not in Myrtle's carefully crafted script. Comparisons don't just wound, they erase. They turn everything you've done into nothing, and they make you wonder if sacrifice ever meant anything at all. I pressed my fork into the edge of the plate, steadying my hands. My silence wasn't agreement. It was restraint. I thought about standing, about cutting through their lies with the truth. The words rose in my throat, but I held them back. Speaking now would only feed their performance, so I stayed still. I let their voices fill the air and reveal themselves. Every word they spoke carved their own reflection, not mine. I reminded myself, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is wait. Let them speak. Let them show who they are. I leaned back slightly, keeping my eyes clear, and let the silence I held weigh heavier than anything they could say. Silence, I remembered from a quote I once read, is one of the hardest arguments to refute. The older couples nearby murmured to each other, not in my defense, but in discomfort. They knew the cruelty. They just didn't want to confront it. To anyone watching closely, it might have looked like defeat, but I knew better. It was the beginning of patience sharpening into something far more powerful. Glasses clinked as Sopheneba stood. She lifted hers high, a dazzling smile spread across her face, every bit of her glowing under the spotlight. Guests hushed, all eyes on her, waiting for the toast they expected. I knew the words wouldn't be meant for me, not even close. I leaned toward my plate, whispering just for myself, if they're this bold now, what will they dare to say when the spotlight's on them? The hum of voices faded into anticipation, the bride's voice ready to slice the air. And I braced myself, knowing the next blow would not be hidden behind whispers. It would be wrapped in a toast, polished and cruel. The chatter in the reception hall softened as plates were cleared, leaving only the clinking of glasses and the hum of small conversations. I could hear bits and pieces drifting from nearby tables, words about money, responsibility, and who deserved credit for this spectacle. My heart beat faster as I rehearsed in my head what I wanted to say. Nothing dramatic, just the truth, spoken calmly. That the deposit had been mine, the first brick laid so this glamorous house could be built. I leaned forward, my hand brushing against the edge of the table as I prepared to stand. My voice trembled in my mind before it even reached my lips. Sometimes you must say the truth, even if your voice shakes. That phrase rang in my head like a bell. I rose halfway, lips parting to begin, when a sharper voice cut the air. Don't embarrass yourself tonight. Sopheneba. She didn't raise her volume, but the clarity of her words silenced me more effectively than if she had shouted. The guests nearby chuckled nervously, not because it was funny, but because laughter is easier than confrontation. Others lowered their eyes, suddenly fascinated with their plates, unwilling to be caught in the crossfire. My throat tightened. I sat back down slowly, my chair squeaking against the wooden floor, as though announcing my defeat to the room. I forced my face still, but inside I felt the heat crawl up my neck. Silence isn't always chosen, I thought bitterly. Sometimes it's forced on you. I remembered something I'd once read. Gaslighting is telling someone to stop overreacting while they bleed from the wound you gave them. Her words weren't just to stop me. They were to erase me. The wine tasted sour after that, though I hadn't taken a sip. Later, trying to gather myself, I stood and carried my empty glass toward the water station at the back of the hall. The cool air near the kitchen doors was a small relief. That's when I heard Myrtle's voice, low but certain, drifting to another relative. Of course the family home will go to Sopheneba. She's the one who deserves it. Alethea never had a place here. The sting of that sentence struck deeper than any public insult, not only erased from this night, but from the future, too. I froze, the glass slipping slightly in my hand. I had always known I was the one on the outside, but to hear it spoken so plainly, as if it were settled fact, it hollowed me out. It's one thing to be ignored today, I thought. It's another to be written out of tomorrow. I turned away before they could see me standing there, before my face could betray me. I found a corner near the tall windows and leaned against the cold edge of the glass, letting it anchor me. My reflections stared back, tired but sharp, and I pressed my palm to it as if steadying both of us. Every dollar I gave had been treated like charity, not commitment. They saw it as an act of desperation, not sacrifice. But without me, this room wouldn't be glowing. Without me, there would have been no hall, no chandeliers, no stage. A quiet thought surfaced, clear and unshakable. I must protect myself, not expect fairness from them. Many of you know this, I murmured, imagining the people who might listen one day. Sometimes family teaches you your biggest lesson, how to stand alone. I stood straighter then, letting the silence between us be mine this time, not theirs. When I returned to my seat, my jaw was tight, but my hands steady. I lifted my fork and set it against the plate, deliberate, as though every movement was a declaration that I hadn't been broken. Across the room, Sopheneba laughed, head tilted back, her hand on her husband's arm, the picture of a woman untouched by what she had just done. I whispered only for myself, the words sharp in my throat. If they've already stolen the past and future, what will they try to take next? The question burned in the silence, promising that the night had further cruelties yet to unfold. I slipped away from the main table under the pretense of refilling my glass of water. The hall was buzzing with laughter, forks tapping against plates, champagne flutes raised in constant toasts. Above, fairy lights draped across the rafters gave everything a golden glow, but for me the shine felt cold. I let the noise fade behind me as I walked toward the buffet tables near the side corridor. My breath came shallow. Every step replayed the humiliation from earlier, the sting of being silenced before I could even speak. I pressed my palm around the smooth glass I carried, fingers trembling despite my attempt to steady them. When family closes your mouth, I murmured to myself, the walls start listening instead. I paused by the corridor, away from the center, but still close enough to catch the flow of voices. The scent of roasted meat and wine drifted over from the kitchen doors. I stared at my reflection in the darkened window, trying to anchor myself in the silence. Then her voice, my sister's, carried clearly from just around the corner. I froze. She's basically just here to fill a seat, Sopheneba said, laughter curling in her tone. No one really takes her seriously. Another guest chuckled softly in agreement. The sound was quick, almost apologetic, but it was enough. Enough to push the knife deeper. My chest constricted. That one sentence unraveled years of pretending we were just different, not enemies. This wasn't a slip. It wasn't stress. It was deliberate. It's not betrayal when strangers dismiss you, I thought bitterly. It's betrayal when your own blood hands out the knives. I pressed my back against the wall, invisible to them, my nails digging into the side of the glass. I wanted to storm out and demand she repeat those words to my face, but my legs felt heavy, pinned in place by the weight of hearing the truth said aloud. My knees nearly buckled, and I grabbed the edge of a table to hold myself steady. A waiter glanced over, but I waved him away quickly before he could ask. The urge to flee roared in me. I imagined walking straight out to my car, starting the engine, and leaving the hall behind in a cloud of dust. The temptation burned so hot that for a moment I nearly turned. Maybe I should have stayed home, I whispered, voice cracking. Maybe I should have let them pay their own way. Images flashed in my mind. The late nights at the diner, the exhaustion from cleaning offices after hours, the ache in my bones as I pushed through double shifts, and then the memory of that email confirmation, the receipt of the venue deposit, months of sacrifice distilled into one transaction. That piece of paper had been my silent victory, and now, standing there, it felt like it had been swallowed whole by her words. My breaths came faster, shallow, as though I were trying to hold myself upright against a storm that refused to pass. My hand brushed against the necklace at my collarbone. The small silver pendant, a gift from my mother, caught between my fingers. I rubbed it gently, feeling the engraving. Truth. Mom knew I'd need this reminder one day, I whispered. A sudden clarity cut through the fog of despair. If I walked away now, I would hand them the narrative they had built. I'd become exactly what they called me. But if I stayed, if I endured, then the truth would remain in my hands. I straightened my shoulders. They thought they'd written me out of this story, but stories don't end when someone lies. They end when the truth has its say. I remembered another phrase I'd heard. Americans love the underdog, but only if the underdog doesn't give up before the last round. I wouldn't be the one to surrender. Not here. Not tonight. Resolve hardened in me like steel cooling into form. I wasn't going to fight by screaming across tables or hurling insults. My silence would not be their victory. It would be my blade, sharpened quietly, waiting for the right strike. I turned back toward the main hall, steps steadier than before. The laughter still rang out, silverware still clattered, but the sound no longer pierced me. I slipped back into my seat, my eyes calm, sharper now, fixed not on the insults, but on the people who thought they had already won. They think I'm cornered, I whispered under my breath. They forget silence is where I sharpen my blade. The night wasn't over, and neither was I. The room hushed as Sopheneba rose from her chair, a crystal glass raised elegantly in her hand. All eyes turned toward her, the rustle of dresses and the scrape of chairs fading as if the hall itself bent to her charisma. Applause rippled automatically, unthinking, the kind of applause given more to tradition than to the person in front of them. She stood in the center of the spotlight, glowing under the fairy lights, as though the entire evening had been orchestrated for this exact moment. She thanked the venue for its unforgettable hospitality, praised her in-laws for welcoming her into the fold with open arms, and nodded graciously toward distant relatives who had flown in. Everyone received a ribbon of her gratitude, except me. I sat still, the sting of omission sharp but familiar. Gratitude is currency at weddings, and tonight, in her world, I was bankrupt. The crowd nodded, clapped, raised their glasses, none of them catching, or choosing not to catch, that the one person who had held this foundation together hadn't even been mentioned. Then, with a glance in my direction that carried the weight of a dagger wrapped in silk, she added, "Even those who came from far away, we appreciate your presence." The words hung in the air, coated with sugar, but the aftertaste was bitter. My jaw tightened as I sipped my water. No name, no acknowledgement of what had truly been given. To the others, it sounded kind. To me, it was theater. Polite applause followed, the guests smiling as if reassured by her generosity. I could feel their eyes flicker toward me, satisfied that I had been included, though they didn't realize I had been dismissed in the same breath. Inside, I told myself, gratitude without truth is performance. And this performance had no encore. From another table, a cousin leaned to his wife and whispered, "She's always so gracious, isn't she?" The wife nodded, clapping. I turned slightly in my chair, letting my face remain neutral, but my thoughts sharpened. We all know someone who can thank you without ever meaning it. Tonight, that someone was my sister. Her tone shifted seamlessly into a string of childhood memories, her voice weaving the past into the present. Guests leaned forward, eager to laugh, to be charmed by the nostalgia. "I remember how I always had to carry the weight," she said with a dramatic sigh, pausing for effect. "Because my sister was too dreamy, too lazy to help." Laughter rippled across the tables, bubbling like champagne. Even Myrtle chuckled loudly, nodding in agreement. Heat rose in my chest. My hands clenched under the table until my nails pressed into the skin of my palms. Each word was carefully chosen, polished until it sounded harmless to strangers. But to me, it was a deliberate rewrite. It's one thing to erase me, it's another to rewrite me into a punchline. A guest at my table murmured, "That doesn't sound fair." Another hushed him quickly, eyes darting to see if anyone had noticed. Most hadn't. They were too busy enjoying the show. I imagined myself standing, refuting her story point by point, laying bare the truth of who had carried whom. But I didn't move. Not yet. The truth doesn't need me to scream, I reminded myself. It only needs time and proof. I steadied my breath, sipping from my glass slowly, deliberately, as though silence were my armor. My dignity would not be surrendered to the noise. I recalled a saying I'd once heard from an older friend. Americans love underdogs, but only when they stand back up. So I sat, waiting for the moment to rise again. Sometimes, not fighting is the fight. My silence wasn't weakness. It was a promise. Applause erupted as Sopheneba ended her toast with a flourish, smiling brilliantly, soaking in the admiration. Guests cheered, glasses raised high, the hall echoing with their joy. But I sat still, watching her, studying her. Every word had been bait, carefully designed to provoke me into breaking character, to humiliate me in front of everyone. I lifted my glass of water, sipping slowly, and whispered under my breath, "They want me humiliated. They forgot humiliation can sharpen resolve." I set the glass down gently, my face calm, but my heart alight with quiet fire. The tension in the air coiled tighter, and I knew the next escalation was already on its way. The microphone passed from hand to hand, each relative offering a story or blessing, their voices filled with the comfortable rhythm of belonging. I sat stiff in my chair, palms damp, heart racing. Then the MC's gaze landed on me. "Would you like to say a few words?" he asked, polite but hesitant, as though expecting me to decline. I rose slowly, smoothing the fabric of my dress, determined to use this chance. Nothing extravagant, just a moment to thank those gathered, to remind everyone quietly that I wasn't invisible. I wrapped my fingers around the microphone, its weight heavy but solid. I drew in a breath, my voice steady at first. "I just want to say—" The sound cut out. A hollow silence filled the hall. I tapped the mic once, then again. The guests looked at each other, murmurs rippling, confusion mixing with curiosity. The MC frowned, shrugged helplessly, muttered, "Technical glitch." But when I looked up, my eyes caught Sopheneba's. Cold. Intentional. The faintest curl of satisfaction tugged at her lips before she turned back toward the guests, perfectly composed. Shock clamped down on me like a fist. I stood frozen, the words stuck in my chest, until the MC gently reached for the microphone. "It happens sometimes," he said lightly, as though it were no more than a hiccup in the evening. But I knew better. Before I could gather myself, Sopheneba slid smoothly into the space left open, taking the mic with practiced ease. Her smile was dazzling, her tone light and amused. "Don't worry," she said, glancing briefly at me before turning to the crowd. "She's not used to public speaking." The hall erupted in laughter, quick and easy, the kind people release when they want to be part of the crowd. And then she twisted the knife. She only came for the free champagne anyway. Gasps scattered like startled birds, followed by chuckles from those too uncomfortable to remain silent. I felt their eyes dart toward me, then away, unwilling to meet mine. Some smirked, others pretended to be busy with their napkins. I lowered myself slowly back into my chair. My fists clenched under the table, nails pressing into my palms. They weren't just cutting the mic, they were cutting me out of the story. The untouched champagne flute glittered before me. My reflection shimmered in its golden surface, distorted and fragile. I stared at it until my thoughts sharpened into something dangerous. I paid for this hall, I thought, for this stage, for her spotlight. And she dares call me a freeloader. I remembered every hour spent wiping counters, the ache in my legs from standing double shifts, the nights I scraped together meals of canned beans so money could be saved. Every dollar bent and stretched until it became the deposit that made tonight possible. And now, in this hall I had secured, I was erased with a laugh. "Sometimes silence isn't golden," I whispered inside. "Sometimes it's just the bruise before the fight." Humiliation thickened in my chest, but beneath it burned a clarity I hadn't felt until this very moment. This was no longer about embarrassment. It was about truth. Truth they couldn't erase, no matter how loudly they performed. I lifted my gaze, watching as plates were delivered again, as guests resumed their laughter like nothing had happened. The cruelty had already been folded back into the fabric of celebration, dismissed as another joke, another passing moment. At a nearby table, two cousins whispered, one shaking his head. That was too much. The other hushed him quickly. Let it go. Tonight isn't the time. Their indifference cut deeper than the insult. Indifference is its own kind of cruelty. It tells you your worth doesn't even warrant a defense. I shifted my focus back to Sopheneba. She leaned easily against her groom's arm, her smile wide, her face glowing with victory. She believed she had sealed my silence. But she was wrong. I whispered under my breath, just for myself. Let her think this is the end. She doesn't know I still hold the receipt. The memory of that proof, folded neatly in my purse, steadied me. I folded my hands tightly on the table, eyes fixed on my sister across the room. Calm spread over me, deliberate and sharp. The fire inside no longer shook me, it honed me. If she wanted war, I whispered, voice barely audible above the clinking of cutlery, she just declared it. And with that, I knew the night would turn. The hall had fallen back into its rhythm, cutlery clinking, wine glasses raised, the hum of gossip resuming as though nothing sharp had just been said. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, swallowing the ache of humiliation like a stone that refused to go down. It was then that I felt a light touch on my shoulder. I turned slightly and saw Jamela, one of the venue staff, leaning in discreetly. Her voice was soft, careful, as if she knew the weight of the words before they left her lips. "You're the one who covered the deposit, aren't you?" My eyes widened. It had been hours since I had arrived and endured insult after insult, but this moment cracked the surface. Finally, someone spoke the truth. I whispered back, "You saw it?" She gave a subtle nod. "We see everything. Payment records, contracts. Your name was on that check." Then she straightened quickly, gliding away as though nothing had been said, her professionalism intact. The sound of laughter continued around me, oblivious, but inside me, something shifted. Sometimes it takes a stranger to say what family never will. Her words lit a fire under the ashes of my restraint. My humiliation hadn't been delusion. Proof existed. It wasn't just my memory of sacrifice, it was written, recorded, undeniable. I thought of every night I had dragged myself out of bed for double shifts, the groceries I had put back on shelves, the envelope of cash I'd refused to spend so I could save. It all funneled into that moment I pressed send on the bank transfer. I closed my eyes briefly, then opened them with resolve hardening in my chest. If they won't tell the truth, I will, and I won't raise my voice. I'll raise evidence. The line from Aldous Huxley came to me like a whisper from the past. Facts do not cease to exist because they are ignored. The air in the hall felt heavier. I inhaled deeply and placed my hand on my purse. I rose slowly, heart pounding but hands steady. Guests turned one by one, curiosity rising. What would the quiet sister do now? I walked forward, the purse brushing against my hip, each step deliberate. I stopped at the long front table where Sopheneba sat, her smile still painted bright, though I could feel her eyes on me like daggers. From my purse, I withdrew a sealed envelope. The paper inside was stiff, official, the bank receipt and the payment confirmation. I laid it on the table in front of her, careful, precise, as if setting down a mirror. My voice was even, sharp enough to cut through the chatter. "Funny," I said. "The freeloader paid for all this." The silence that followed was heavier than any applause had been all night. The hall froze, glasses hovered mid-air. No one laughed now. Gasps rose from several tables, quick and sharp. Myrtle's fork slipped against her plate with a shriek of metal. The groom's family stiffened, looking from me to Sopheneba. She blinked rapidly, her lips parting as though to protest, but nothing came. The whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you hear what she said? Is that true? Did she?" I knew something was off. Aunts and uncles who had laughed earlier now looked stricken. Cousins shifted in their seats, some refusing to meet my gaze. One leaned to his wife, whispering, "All this time, and they let her take the blame." Sopheneba froze, her smile faltering for the first time that night. Her hands trembled around her glass, the perfect mask cracking at its edges. Myrtle pressed her napkin to her lips, shifting uncomfortably, her earlier chuckles nowhere to be found. She avoided my eyes, staring hard at her plate, as though the answers might be written there. The sound in the hall rose and fell in waves of murmurs, like a tide shifting after a storm. I stood still, letting the silence around me do the work. Truth doesn't need applause. It just needs to breathe. And in that hall, it finally did. I turned back toward my seat, my steps calm, deliberate. The envelope lay behind me on the bride's table like a stone dropped into still water, its ripples spreading further and further with every whisper. I sat down again, folding my hands tightly, my face composed. My heart, though, beat with a new rhythm, not of fear, but of resolve. "This isn't the end," I whispered to myself, low enough that only I could hear. "This is the beginning." The storm had shifted, and for the first time that night, it was no longer against me. It was against her. The hall was still humming from the ripple of whispers, yet under it lay a silence that clung to me like a second skin. I walked back to my seat slowly, each step louder than the applause that had filled this place just minutes earlier. The spotlight that had once painted my sister in golden light now seemed to follow me. Or maybe it was just the eyes of the crowd, curious, unsettled, waiting. When I reached my table, my gaze fell on the ivory nameplate in front of me, the one that had branded me with a word meant to cut deeper than any knife. FREeloader. It still sat there, mocking in its simplicity. I picked it up without hesitation. The cardboard was stiff under my fingers. I slipped it into my purse with deliberate care, my voice whispering in my head. They branded me with a word. Tonight, I took it back. I sat for a breath, then rose again, a glass of water in hand. Not champagne, not a toast to blend in with their performance, just water. I lifted it quietly, gave the hall a single nod, and turned toward the exit. My heels clicked sharply against the polished wooden floor, each strike punctuating the silence. No one moved to stop me. They only whispered. Sometimes the loudest protest is walking away. As I neared the door, the murmurs rose behind me. "Did you see the envelope?" "She had the receipts." "She paid for all of it?" The questions flew like startled birds across the tables. Conversations multiplied, a wave of gossip sweeping the hall. Some faces turned toward me with dawning recognition, others with shame. A few shook their heads at Myrtle, who stared hard at her plate, lips pressed tight as though the china might offer her refuge. "Unbelievable," I heard one uncle mutter. "All this time, and they let her carry it." His wife hissed back, "Keep your voice down." But it was too late. Truth, like spilled wine, spreads without permission. Once it hits the floor, there's no stopping it. I kept walking, steady, as their words built behind me, pressing into Sopheneba. I glanced back once, just enough to see her face. The smile she had clung to all night was gone. Her lips trembled, her jaw tight, and her eyes, those sharp eyes, darted from guest to guest as though searching for an ally and finding none. She leaned toward her groom, hissing something through her teeth. He didn't meet her gaze. His hand twitched on the table, but never moved to touch hers. Myrtle shifted uncomfortably, lifting her wineglass as a shield. Her laugh, once so loud, had vanished, replaced with a silence that clung heavier than mine ever had. For once, their silence wasn't mine, it was theirs. I remembered another phrase I'd once held close. Power is not taken, it is surrendered when truth walks into the room. Tonight, I hadn't shouted, hadn't begged, I'd only shown the truth, and their power had slipped right through their hands. The wooden doors opened, and I stepped into the cool Denver night. The air hit my face, crisp, cutting through the heat that had burned in my chest all evening. The sky was wide and dark above the ranch, a blanket of stars sprawling without judgment. I clutched my purse tighter, feeling the edge of the nameplate inside pressing against my palm. That word no longer felt like a brand, it felt like evidence, proof of what they had tried to make me and how I had taken it back. This chapter closed inside, I whispered to myself, voice steady. But the story isn't over. Behind me, the buzz of voices grew, no longer celebratory, no longer united. The whispers of truth had taken root, and I knew they would not die quietly. The doors shut behind me, muting the echoes of whispers and clinking glasses that still swirled inside the reception hall. For the first time all night, I felt the weight of air that belonged only to me. The Denver night pressed cool against my skin, crisp and bracing after the suffocating heat of forced laughter and sharpened words. My heels crunched against gravel, steady, deliberate, each step carrying more meaning than any word I could have spoken inside. I stopped beside my old sedan, the paint dulled by years of weather, the handle cool under my palm. I leaned there for a moment, letting the silence settle into me, listening to the wind ripple through the open fields. The stars stretched above, unbothered by the storm of pride and pettiness I'd just left behind. Sometimes leaving doesn't mean running, I thought. It means choosing peace over poison. I reached for the silver necklace at my collarbone. My fingers lingered on the pendant, its familiar warmth grounding me, pulling me back into myself. The word engraved into it, truth, gleamed faintly in the moonlight. A memory flickered unbidden. My mother's voice, gentle yet firm, whispering as she clasped it around my neck years ago. Always stand tall, even when no one claps for you. I closed my eyes and whispered into the night. You saw this coming, didn't you, Mom? The necklace wasn't just jewelry, it was my anchor. Every time I touched it, I remembered that worth wasn't decided by applause or by the slanders carved into nameplates. It was carried inside, steady, immovable, no matter who tried to deny it. I thought back on the night, every sneer, every joke disguised as kindness, every toast that carved me out of the story. The laughter at my expense still rang in my ears. But here, in the stillness, I realized something I hadn't felt inside that hall. I wasn't a victim. Not anymore. They tried to erase me, I said softly. But you can't erase someone who carries their truth. Resilience isn't built in comfort. It's forged in fire, and tonight had been the fire. My silence had never been surrender. It had been the seed of something larger, something undeniable that had already begun to sprout. Through the windows of the hall, I could still see silhouettes moving, glasses raised in shallow toasts, laughter forcing itself into the air. But the whispers of truth I had set loose were already circulating. They would echo louder than any toast could, reaching further than any curated slideshow. They wanted me small, I reflected, but tonight they exposed themselves. I remembered something I'd once heard. In America, reputations die not in scandals, but in whispers no one forgets, and tonight those whispers had been planted in fertile ground. My shoulders relaxed for the first time in hours. A calm smile spread across my face, not of triumph, but of release. I had nothing left to prove, not to them, not to anyone. The envelope was there, the truth spoken, and silence no longer belonged to me. It belonged to them. I pulled my keys from my purse, but paused before unlocking the car. The necklace still lay warm against my skin, my thumb brushing over the word again. The night is over, I whispered, steady and sure. But tomorrow, the truth will have its day. I slipped into the driver's seat, the hum of the night closing around me. Behind me, the hall buzzed with restless voices, whispers refusing to die, proof refusing to be buried. Ahead of me stretched a road I had driven alone before, but this time, I wasn't leaving empty. This time, I carried my truth. The morning light crept into the thin curtains of the motel room, pale and unassuming. I blinked awake, the ache of last night still pressing behind my eyes. For a moment I lay still, listening to the hum of traffic on the road outside, replaying fragments of everything that had unfolded. The card that branded me, the laughter, the silence, the envelope on the table. The sting of their insults lingered, sharp as ever, but so did the clarity of what I had done. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, the screen glowing with a flood of notifications. Missed calls. Messages. Dozens of them. My relatives, cousins, people I hadn't heard from in months, suddenly had something to say. The whispers from the reception had grown overnight. I scrolled briefly, gossip spreading like wildfire, questions flying in every direction. My reputation, which they had tried to suffocate, was now carried by voices that wouldn't stop. Reputation, I muttered to myself, travels faster than any wedding toast. I opened one notification from the venue's official account. A post, plain but powerful, filled the screen. Special gratitude to Alethea, who made last night possible through her generosity. My name, my full name. Public, clear, undeniable. The words sat there, louder than any of Sophoneba's toasts, louder than the laughter that had tried to erase me. Comments rolled beneath it. I had no idea. Shame on them for not saying it last night. She deserved better. Shockwaves spread as the truth hit people like a stone dropped into still water. The performance my sister had staged was unraveling online, thread by thread. I whispered, half to myself, half to the empty room. One post carried more truth than her whole speech. And then I laughed softly, without bitterness, just relief. The internet never forgets. The phone buzzed again. Another call, this one from Myrtle. I let it ring once, twice, then picked it up. Her voice faltered, heavy with the weight of someone backpedaling. Alethea, we didn't know. We were wrong. I stayed silent long enough for her to feel it, then replied simply, You knew enough to laugh. And I ended the call. Other relatives sent apologies cloaked in excuses. They hadn't realized, they hadn't meant harm, they thought it was just a joke. Their words all blurred together into the same confession. They had chosen the crowd over me. But Sopheneba? Nothing. No text. No call. Just silence. And that silence was louder than anything she could have said. Silence, I thought, is sometimes the only confession left. Later that afternoon, I drove back to the venue to collect the things I had left behind. The parking lot was nearly empty, only a few staff lingering as they cleared away the remnants of last night. She was waiting for me, Sopheneba. Standing near the entrance, arms folded, her eyes burning with fury she could no longer disguise. So this is how you wanted it? She snapped. To humiliate me? To make me look small? I stepped closer, steady, refusing to let her anger shake me. I pulled the nameplate from my purse, the one with FREeloader scrawled across it, and held it out to her. Keep it, I said, my voice even. You'll need it more than me, because when people ask who paid, they'll know it wasn't you. Her lips parted, rage spilling into silence, but she didn't take the card. She couldn't. I let it drop onto the table beside her. It landed with a dull slap, heavy as truth itself. Some truths don't need repeating, I added. They carve themselves into memory. The drive out of Denver was quiet, the road stretching long and familiar. I touched the necklace at my collarbone again, fingers brushing over the word engraved. Truth. The weight I had carried into that hall was gone. In its place was something lighter, steadier. I didn't lose a family that night, I whispered into the stillness of the car. I lost an illusion. The horizon widened ahead of me, sky breaking open into light. I thought of a phrase I had once read, one that felt truer now than ever. Sometimes you don't get the family you deserve, you build it yourself. I smiled, not for anyone else, but for me, for the strength I had reclaimed, the justice that had found its way without fists or shouts, only truth. And as the miles rolled beneath my tires, I knew one thing with certainty. I was no longer carrying their burden. I was carrying my own story,